The sky was a dull shade of purple as the spacecraft ascended, cutting through the clouds like a knife through soft butter. A low hum resonated throughout the hull, its vibrations sending small tremors through the crew's bodies. The planet below, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed barren, a dying ember in the vast cold of space. This was no ordinary mission. It wasn't about exploration, nor was it about discovering new life. No, it was a mission of survival. Brace for impact. Captain Ayla's voice echoed to the cockpit, sharp and authoritative, though the uncertainty in her eyes betrayed her calm demeanor. This was supposed to be a routine mission, a simple extraction, but as the ship made its final approach to the planet's surface, the turbulence was unlike anything they'd encountered before. The crew of the RAG-7 had been assigned to this derelict world to extract what little remaining resources it had. The planet had been at the forefront of scientific advancement until a catastrophic event, which had turned it into a desolate wasteland. But within its ruins lay something valuable, something that could turn the tide of the war against the alien forces threatening humanity's very existence. Ayla wasn't sure what they would find down there, but it was clear that they weren't alone. The planet had a strange, unsettling atmosphere, like a remnant of a broken world, haunted by its own past. "Captain, sensors are picking up strange readings," Lieutenant Vaughn reported, his fingers flying across the control panel, his brow furrowed. "There are energy signatures beneath the surface. It's faint, but it's definitely there." Ayla's grip on the control panel tightened. "Get us closer. We're not leaving without that intel." The crew braced as the ship descended lower, the rocky surface growing clearer through the viewport. As they broke the cloud cover, a vast field of ashes stretched before them, dotted with what appeared to be ruined cities. Once majestic towers, now reduced to crumbling monuments to a forgotten civilization. In the distance, an enormous crater could be seen, its edge jagged and charred. This was the site of the event that had destroyed the planet, the very reason why the world had become inhospitable. Ayla's team had been dispatched to locate and retrieve whatever remained of the technology that could help them fight back. The alien forces had advanced quickly, and humanity was in dire need of any advantage. "Touchdown in T-minus 30 seconds, Ayla called to the crew. The ship descended, its landing gear scraping the ashen surface before finally settling into place. The crew immediately began their preparations. The atmosphere outside was toxic, though breathable with the right equipment. Ayla donned her helmet, securing it tightly before looking over at her crew. Lieutenant Vaughn, a brilliant engineer, was checking his tools and scanning the area with a handheld device. Specialist Yara, a seasoned soldier, adjusted the straps on her weaponry. She was always calm under pressure, her piercing blue eyes scanning their surroundings with an almost predatory focus. And then there was Zane, the newest recruit, a young, idealistic member who still hadn't experienced the true horrors of war. His nerves were showing, but Ayla wasn't about to let him falter now. "Ready to move out," Yara said, her voice low and steady. Ayla nodded. "Let's make it quick. We've got a job to do." They moved quickly, stepping out of the ship and onto the cracked, barren landscape. The wind howled around them, carrying the stench of decay. The air was thick, and the ground beneath their boots felt soft, like it might collapse into nothing at any moment. "Keep your eyes peeled," Ayla ordered. "We don't know what else might be out here." The team moved forward in a tight formation, their boots crunching against the ash. Ayla's mind raced with questions. What kind of technology had the inhabitants left behind? What had caused this destruction? And most importantly, would they make it back alive? The energy signatures that Vaughn had detected seemed to lead them toward the crater. The closer they got, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air felt heavier, thick with an invisible weight. It was as though the planet itself was trying to warn them, to hold them back. But they pressed on. As they neared the edge of the crater, something caught Ayla's eye, a flicker of movement, a shadow darting just beyond the edge of their vision. She froze, signaling the others to stop. "Did anyone else see that?" she whispered. Yara nodded, her weapon ready in an instant. "I saw it. Could be nothing, but let's stay alert." The team continued their approach, now more cautious. But the closer they got to the crater, the more unsettling the situation became. The energy readings grew stronger, pulsing erratically, and an eerie silence descended on them. Not even the wind dared to disturb it. Finally, they reached the rim of the crater. The ground dropped away into a jagged pit, filled with the remnants of broken machinery. But amidst the wreckage, something gleamed, shiny, almost metallic, and far too intact belonged to this ruined world. "That's it," Vaughn muttered, his voice tinged with excitement. "The source of the readings." Ayla looked down into the crater, a mix of awe and apprehension settling in her chest. "Get ready. Let's see what we're dealing with." As they began to descend, the ground beneath their feet shifted, the subtle vibrations of an impending danger humming through the air. The silence was unbearable, thick with the feeling that something was waiting for them, watching them. And as they reached the bottom, the unmistakable feeling of being not just on another planet, but inside something far older, far more dangerous, settled over Ayla. Whatever had been left behind on this world, whatever they had come for, was not going to be easy to obtain. The air grew heavier as the team advanced deeper into the crater, the eerie silence around them only punctuated by their own footsteps. Ayla couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, lurking in the shadows just out of reach. The strange energy readings were stronger here, pulsing rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. The source of it all was just ahead, nestled within the wreckage of a massive structure. But the closer they got, the more uneasy the team became. "Keep your eyes open," Ayla muttered. "We're not alone." "Agreed," Yara said, her hand never leaving the grip of her weapon. She scanned the surroundings, her eyes darting from one shadow to the next. There was something unnatural about the way the debris seemed to shift in the periphery, almost as if the planet itself was alive, resistant to their presence. Vaughn, the ever-curious engineer, was already kneeling by a large metallic object embedded in the earth. He ran his hands over the surface, his fingers tracing strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. "Captain, this isn't just wreckage. This is part of something bigger. Whatever this is, it's technology we've never seen before. Advanced beyond anything we've got." Ayla crouched beside him, eyeing the intricate designs. "How long do you think it'll take to access the power core?" "Not long," Vaughn said, pulling out a series of tools from his belt. "If I can just get past this encryption, we should be able to tap into the power source. It's definitely running on some form of alien tech." Ayla nodded, her focus shifting as she surveyed their surroundings once more. They had to get in and out fast. Too many unknowns were piling up, and the energy reading suggested something far more dangerous was stirring beneath the surface. "Captain," Zane's voice broke through her thoughts, tense and uncertain. "There's movement. Something's out there." Ayla's heart skipped a beat. She turned to look at Zane, who was scanning the horizon nervously. "Where?" "To the west. In the ruins. It looks like shadows, but they're not normal. It's like they're moving on their own." Ayla's pulse quickened. "Stay sharp. Yara, check it out." Yara didn't need to be told twice. She moved with lethal precision, her weapon raised as she slipped between the wrecked buildings, her movements blending with the shadows themselves. Ayla could feel the tension in the air. Something was coming, and it wasn't friendly. Vaughn didn't look up from his work. "Whatever it is, we need to hurry," he muttered. "We're sitting ducks out here." Ayla's instinct screamed at her to get everyone back to the ship, but the promise of the technology, a potential game-changer in their fight against the alien forces, was too great. They needed it, and they needed it now. A few minutes later, Yara returned, her face grim. "It's not just shadows, Captain. We're being hunted. There's something out there, and it's definitely aware of us." Ayla's gut twisted. The energy readings had spiked, now emanating from multiple points around them. Whatever was out there was circling them, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the glowing symbols in the debris were growing brighter, a faint hum filling the air. They were so close to unlocking the power source, so close to gaining the advantage they needed. "Vaughn, are you close?" Ayla asked, trying to ignore the gnawing sense of dread creeping in. Vaughn looked up, his face pale but determined. "Almost. Just need to bypass the last layer of encryption." Ayla nodded. "Do it. We'll cover you." As Vaughn worked, the team spread out, taking defensive positions among the wreckage. The silence was maddening, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, moving in ways that defied logic. Every now and then, Ayla would catch a glimpse of something, an outline, a flash of movement, but nothing concrete. Then it happened. A low, guttural growl echoed from the depth of the ruins, reverberating to the ground like a tremor. The shadows came to life, darting across the cracked landscape with unnatural speed. Ayla's heart pounded in her chest as she whipped her weapon into position, scanning the area for any sign of the threat. From the darkness emerged a creature unlike anything she had seen before. It was humanoid but twisted. Its skin was a patchwork of scales and scars, its eyes glowing a sickly green. The air around it shimmered with a faint distortion, as if it were manipulating the fabric of reality itself. "Stay back!" Yara yelled, her weapon aimed squarely at the creature. But it didn't retreat. Instead, it lunged. The creature was fast, far faster than any human could react. It barreled into Yara with terrifying strength, knocking her to the ground. Ayla barely had time to react before more creatures. There were at least 5 now, emerged from the ruins, their glowing eyes locked onto the team. "Vaughn, finish it!" Ayla shouted, even as she fired into the nearest creature, the blast sending it stumbling back. Vaughn's fingers flew over his console. Just a few more seconds. Ayla fired again, but the creatures were closing in fast. Zane stumbled, tripping over a chunk of debris as one creature's reached for him. His heart raced, his breath coming in panicked gasps. But before the creature could grab him, Yara tackled it to the ground, sending both of them rolling across the cracked earth. "Captain, I've got it!" Vaughn's voice was triumphant. But there was no time to celebrate. The power core hummed to life, a brilliant blue light erupting from the alien structure as the creatures hissed in pain, recoiling from the energy. It was like a shock wave, knocking the creatures back and creating a protective barrier around the team. But they weren't safe yet. The battle was only just beginning. The creatures staggered, momentarily stunned by the pulse of energy that emanated from the power core. Their unnatural hisses filled the air as they recoiled into the shadows, their glowing eyes flickering with an unsettling hunger. Ayla's breath came in ragged gasps as she aimed her weapon at the closest one, her finger itching to pull the trigger. But she hesitated, her mind racing. They had the energy they needed, the advantage they'd come for, but this was far from over. "Stay focused," Yara shouted, her voice sharp and commanding as she pushed herself to her feet, her weapon raised. "We've only got a few moments before they regroup." Ayla nodded, her heart pounding in her chest as she scanned the perimeter. The creatures were regrouping, their movements synchronized and almost deliberate. They weren't just mindless beasts. They were organized, intelligent, and that made them far more dangerous. "Vaughn, how long until we can use the power?" Ayla called over her shoulder, her eyes darting between the creatures and the alien device now glowing with an almost blinding light. "I'm rerouting the core's energy into the ship systems," Vaughn replied, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "If I can get this thing powered up, we can blast our way out. Just give me a minute." "A minute?" Ayla's voice was tight with frustration. "We don't have that long. Get it done now." The creatures were beginning to circle, closing in on their position. Their movements were deliberate, patient, as if they were sizing up the team. Ayla gripped her weapon tighter, but she knew firepower alone wouldn't be enough to hold them off for long. These creatures were resilient, and the energy pulse had only slowed them, not stopped them. Zane's voice broke through her thoughts, panicked. "Captain, there's more of them. I see movement from the other side of the ruins." Ayla's eyes snapped to the horizon, and her stomach dropped. Another wave of creatures was emerging from the darkness, more of them than before. They were everywhere now, swarming the ruins like a tide of shadows. Their glowing eyes pierced the gloom, and Ayla's pulse quickened. The situation was slipping from her control faster than she could handle. "We need to move," Yara growled, her voice low and full of grit. "We can't hold them off much longer." Ayla's mind raced. There was only one option left, retreat. But where could they go? The ship was still grounded, vulnerable. And even if they reached it, the creatures would be right on their heels. "Vaughn, can you accelerate the energy transfer?" Ayla snapped, her voice desperate. We need that ship online now. Vaughn's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked furiously at the console. I'm trying, Captain, but this thing is like nothing I've ever seen. The systems are... A deafening roar suddenly filled the air, cutting off Vaughn's words. The creatures were charging now, moving in unison as they surged forward, their bodies shifting unnaturally as they propelled themselves toward the team with terrifying speed. Ayla's heart skipped a beat. There was no time left. Get to the ship, she yelled. Now! Without waiting for a response, Ayla turned and sprinted toward the direction of the RAG-7, her boots pounding against the cracked earth. Behind her, the sound of the creature's pursuit grew louder, a terrifying, inescapable sound that made her pulse race. They were closing in fast. The rest of the team followed, but the creatures were relentless. Yara, leading the charge, fired back at the creatures as they approached, but it was clear that they couldn't slow them down for long. Ayla's breath came in ragged gasps as they pushed forward, the ship looming ahead like a distant salvation. But then, just as they were about to break through the final line of debris, one of the creatures lunged. Its claws slashed through the air with a sickening screech, and in one swift motion, it tackled Zane to the ground. He screamed, his voice high with terror, as the creature's sharp talons tore into his suit. No! Ayla shouted, turning back just as Yara dove toward Zane, throwing herself at the creature to pull it away from him. The force of collision knocked the creature back, but it wasn't enough to stop it. It quickly regained its footing, turning its gaze toward Yara with an unmistakable hunger. Go! Yara yelled, blood trickling from a gash on her cheek as she struggled to keep the creature at bay. I've got this. Go! Ayla hesitated, her mind screaming at her to stay, to help Yara, but there was no time. The other creatures were too close, their glowing eyes filled with malice as they closed in on the group. She could hear the frantic shouting of the others, but it was drowned out by the deafening roar of the creatures. Captain, we can't wait. Vaughn shouted, his voice frantic. The power is coming online, but we need to leave now. Yara's voice rang out once more, raw with pain but filled with determination. Go, Ayla. Save the mission. With a final, reluctant glance at Yara, Ayla turned and ran, urging her legs to move faster, her heart pounding in her chest. The ship was just ahead now. So close, but the creatures were right behind them. Ayla reached the ship's hatch, slamming her hand against the console as the doors began to close. The others were already inside, but Zane was still out there, and Yara was too. She could hear Zane's terrified voice shouting, but she couldn't look back now. The ship's engines roared to life, the thrusters kicking in as they prepared for takeoff. Ayla pressed her face against the viewport, her heart in her throat as she scanned the dark landscape below. In the distance, she could just make out the shape of Yara, still holding her ground, still fighting. And then the hatch closed with a final thud, sealing them inside. The RAG-7 lifted off, breaking free of the planet's atmosphere. But as they soared into space, the weight of their mission and the lives they had left behind weighed heavily on Ayla's chest. The silence of space wrapped around them as the RAG-7 drifted further away from the planet's surface. The stars outside the viewport seemed distant, cold, indifferent. Inside the ship, however, the tension was palpable. Ayla stood at the controls, her hands gripping the edges of the console as her eyes remained fixed on the planet below. The others were gathered around her, their faces etched with exhaustion, worry, and loss. Vaughn was the first to speak, his voice surprisingly calm despite the chaos. The power core is fully integrated. We have everything we need to power up the ship's weapon systems and shields. The tech we retrieved, it's more advanced than anything we've encountered. Ayla nodded, but the words fell hollow. Yes, the mission had been a success. They had the alien technology that could change the tide of the war they were fighting. But at what cost? Yara and Zane, two of their best, were still back on that forsaken world, left behind in the wake of their escape. She could still hear Yara's voice in her head, urging her to leave, to complete the mission. The memory stung, and Ayla's chest tightened with a mix of guilt and anger. Yara knew what she was doing. Zane's voice cut through her thoughts, his eyes meeting hers from across the cabin. He had a bandage wrapped around his arm, a crude but effective first aid job. She gave us a fighting chance. And he paused, swallowing hard. I wouldn't have made it if she hadn't helped me. Ayla looked at Zane, his words a bitter reminder of their hard choices. She could see the raw pain in his eyes, the deep regret. They had left Yara behind, and no amount of justification would ever erase that fact. She saved you, Ayla said quietly, her voice steady but heavy with sorrow. But we didn't save her. Zane didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Ayla's thoughts were scattered, torn between the success of their mission and the crushing reality of their losses. The Rag-7 was now on course to the nearest space station, a safe haven where they could rest, regroup, and repair their ship. But every second felt like an eternity as the weight of the situation settled in. Vaughn's voice was softer now, as though he too understood the gravity of the moment. We need to honor their sacrifice, Ayla. This tech, this power, it can turn the tide of the war. Yara and Zane gave everything for this. Ayla's jaw clenched as she forced her gaze away from the stars outside. I know, Vaughn. I know. A quiet hum filled the room as the ship's engines settled into their cruising speed, and the crew members drifted into an uneasy silence. The weight of what they had left behind was too much for any of them to bear alone. Ayla's mind continued to race, but there was no answer, no way to change the past. There was only forward. They had to keep moving for the fallen, for the cause, for Yara, for Zane. As the hours passed, Ayla found herself standing by the viewport, looking down at the fading planet. A strange sense of peace had settled over her, one that was tinged with loss, but also with something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in the chaos of the mission. Hope, the power they had secured, would give them the advantage they desperately needed in the war. It would change everything. And it wasn't just the ship's weapons that were now powered up. It was a team's resolve. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Ayla felt like they had a fighting chance. Captain, Vaughn called from behind her, his voice breaking her out of her reverie. We're receiving a transmission from the station. They're expecting us. Ayla nodded, turning back toward the controls. Set a course to the station, Vaughn. We'll need to make repairs before we can plan our next move. Already on it, Vaughn said, his fingers flying over the console as he adjusted their trajectory. It'll take a while, but we should be able to get the ship in fighting shape again. Good, Ayla replied. And after that, what's our next move? Vaughn didn't look up as he worked, but his voice was resolute. We make sure this tech is integrated into our forces. We bring the fight to them. We don't stop until we finish this. Ayla's gaze softened as she looked at the rest of the crew. They were battered, bruised, and broken in ways that only war could do, but they were still standing. They had survived the impossible, and they weren't about to give up now. Agreed, Ayla said, her voice steady and determined. We finish this. For Yara, for Zane, for everyone who's counting on us. As the Rag-7 moved further from the ruined planet and closer to the safety of the station, Ayla allowed herself one last look out the viewport. The stars stretched out before them, an endless expanse of possibility. The fight ahead would be long, hard, and filled with sacrifices, but there was one thing Ayla knew for sure. They weren't done yet. They had lost so much, but they had also gained something far more powerful: resilience, strength, and the will to fight for a future worth living for. The power was in their hands now, and they would not let it slip away. As the ship entered the station's orbit, Ayla's lips curved into a faint smile, her first genuine one in days. They had risen from the ashes. They had found victory in the darkest of times. And now it was time to win the war.